Hey students, so I'm Professor Emsweiler, and I'll be talking about rational discussion and how to respond to people in rational discussion. So we're going to start off with our famous philosophers Aristotle and Plato walking together, and with our learning objectives for this little module. We're going to learn how to identify, describe, illustrate, and employ the rules of rational discussion and the steps for effective critical commentary. These are courtesy for the rational discussion rules. We're going to be using T. Edward Dahmer's attacking faulty reasoning. And for the steps for effective critical commentary, we're going to be following Daniel Dennett's. Using Dahmer's explanation of fallacious reasoning, we're also going to use his standard of what is a good argument. And this is going to guide us throughout the semester. So this is T. Edward Dahmer's Rules of Rational Discussion. And just to be clear, rationality is based on being both just and seeking the truth authentically. So those two moral principles underlie or serve as foundations for being able to discuss stuff rationally. So the very first thing you need to do when you're going to make a rational argument is you have to prepare yourself for rational discussion. So the first thing you want to do is you want to be able to understand fallibilism. Fallibilism is the idea that things are able to be false. Okay, so if you're in a discussion, let's say there's two people discussing, and they have different perspectives or different opinions about things. Okay, the idea is that they both have to admit prior to even discussing that they themselves could be wrong, that all of the people who possibly have ideas about something could be wrong. Okay, and they need to be able to accept that. They need to be able to prepare their minds for seeking the truth. The goal of inquiry or rational discussion is to find out what is the case, okay? So the person's idea here would be that they would feel comfortable being able to be wrong because their goal is truth-seeking. And of course, for step one, they need to be able to say, I could be wrong, okay? In fact, they should practice prior to making suggestions or particularly things like conjectures. They should practice saying, I could be wrong, but my idea is, and this prefacing of it demonstrates their understanding of fallibilism and also their intellectual humility. When somebody is about to present an argument, so this is the burden of the speaker, okay, or the person writing the argument, the one presenting, they have to understand that they have the burden of proof. I want you to think about it, something like if I'm carrying a tray, okay, so say I'm a wait staff and I'm carrying a tray. I am the one who needs to be able to put the adequate amount of support to hold that tray up. So the amount of force that is being exerted on the tray has to come from me, okay? So that's the burden of supporting a tray, much like the burden of supporting the truth, okay? Or supporting, sorry, and supporting an argument. So the burden of proof is on the person who's making the contention. Now, for the person who's listening, okay, so the audience, what they have to do is they have to prepare their mind for the principle of charity. They must be ready to give the fairest interpretation of the argument that's being presented to them. So step one is just principle of fallibilism, accepting that you could be wrong, so could any of the other people who are in the discussion. And frankly, all of them could be wrong. Next is the principle of truth-seeking. The goal of the inquiry and the discussion has to be discovering the truth, okay? Not some other psychological goal, but the actual epistemic goal. or the epistemic meaning that this goal is about knowledge, okay? It's about trying to find good evidence, okay, to support the conclusions that one is reaching. Again, burden of proof. For this one, the principle of the burden of proof is that the person making the contention, the one who's making the argument, has the burden of proving that sufficiently. And finally, principle of charity. This is, again, the audience for the argument, the one who's listening, must have an open mind, okay, an open heart, open perspective, and must give the fairest interpretation, the one that most vividly, accurately, and justly depicts what that person is representing. Now, the next stage is the actual expression of reasoning. Okay, so the expression of reasoning must meet certain standards, okay, for it to be rational. Must be clear. So the principle of clarity, okay, the goal is to make sure that there's nothing ambiguous or obscure or so metaphorical it's unclear to the person who's listening. So clarity is very important in reasoning. Relevance is next. Okay, the reason relevance is important is that the goal is to stay on topic, and by staying on topic, to be able to focus the inquiry in the direction of what supports what's likely to be true. So stay on topic for the principle of relevance. Acceptability, T. Edward Damer gets into this very much. What we're talking about here is for academic inquiry. Okay, so what is acceptable to educated people around the world? Okay, what would they consider acceptable grounds? And these should be altogether sufficient to offer enough evidence to support the conclusion. There also needs to be presented an effective rebuttal to any concerns or objections that have been brought up or that are known to exist. Okay, so again, we want relevance, we want acceptability, we want clarity, we want them all to be together sufficient, and with any, for any known objection, with a rebuttal that addresses that objection or concern. Finally, the end game. The goal of this inquiry and talking to somebody and listening to somebody and getting different ideas is to problem solve and to make good decisions, to find out what is actually the case. So in the end, different things could occur. You could have a resolution. Everybody could agree to a certain procedure or a certain likelihood of what is the case. People could instead reconsider their position and think again about it. Or for everybody, or for any one of the participants, they could suspend judgment. I mean, they could choose to not judge if something is the case or is not the case until they get more evidence. So using this idea, we can now construct, okay, what would be a good argument. So here's his standard. Damer's standard for a good argument is it must be structurally well-formed, the premises must be relevant, they must be acceptable, they must be sufficient, and there must be an effective rebuttal of challenges to the argument. Okay, so that is what we are ideally going for when we are having argument in inquiry. Okay, so what I want you to do now is to think about, so do an active learning exercise with me, and I'm going to say something that might come up in inquiry or in rational discussion, and then I want you to tell me if it's suspension of judgment principle, the relevance principle, clarity principle, resolution principle, or principle of fallibilism. So first, what if the person says, well, I could be wrong, but how about if they say, your argument is very good. I will agree with your position. Next, neither of our arguments are great, so let's agree to not decide yet. For number 4, I hope to stick to the topic. And finally, I hope to use specific direct language in my reasoning. Okay, so the first part of rational discourse is the rules of rational discussion. The next part has to do with the steps for effective critical commentary. Okay. Oftentimes, when people are talking in communications classes or in English class, they might talk about giving a compliment sandwich, okay, in a way to present something so somebody can listen. I'll say I prefer this method, and this is the method that I'll suggest you guys use every time you are replying to peers in this class. Okay, so step one, you're going to re-express your peer's position as clearly, vividly, and fairly. The way Dennett puts this is that it's going to be, you're going to express it so well that the person's going to look at you and say, gosh, you know, I wish I had said it like that. Okay? The next thing that you want to do is you want to draw attention to any points of agreement that you have with the person who you're discussing with. Okay, so it might be as specific as some of the points that they made. It might also be just generally that the topic is important. Next, you're going to try to state what you have learned, given what you have listened to. State something that you have learned from what they have said. Finally, you can just not say anything at all. Okay, so there's no necessity to make critical commentary when you are listening to another person's argument. Okay, instead, think about trying to praise them, to bring up something that you think is a very good idea that they said, or even just something that you never thought about. Okay, now, if there is something that you want to say critical, then after you've stated those other three things, what you've learned, what their position is, and the things that you agree about, then and only then can you offer a objection, criticism of the reasoning, or a rebuttal to some reasoning that they gave. Okay, so don't feel inclined that you have to do that. Often you're going to do a lot better in class if you listen more and argue against somebody purely for the sake of arguing. You'll have many chances to argue in philosophy classes. You don't need to make them up. So using this, and I'm going to be taking quotes from actual arguments between philosophers, in this case bioethicists, and I want you to consider these stages: the re-expression of the argument stage, the statement of agreement, the statement of what somebody has learned from what the other person has said, and respectful disagreement. So here are the quotes. A, I think we're probably in 95% agreement. Dr. Emmanuel, I think we're getting closer to each other. B, just real quick footnote, Emmanuel said that the most important thing that people really need to pick up on, the CDC needs to change its guidance. As Emmanuel said, the guidance currently focused on testing the symptomatic. And finally, last, and then maybe you and I interpret the Singapore example in different ways.